Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of Minecraft Myth Busting. I want to start off by saying thank you ever so much for all of the support and feedback on the last episode. It really was terrific and it seems like a lot of you are really pumped for the return of this series, as am I. So be sure to leave a like on the videos and let me know that you want more and more myth busting. And in this episode we're going to be taking a look at bats and learning as much as we can about them, because I've been playing Game Mode 4 here on the channel recently. That's a series that's like a slightly modified vanilla, and in that game the bats will actually explode if you get too close to them. So I've become slightly terrified of bats recently, but it's had me asking all sorts of questions about their spawning conditions and behaviour. And what I set out to do is a bunch of tests in this episode, and hopefully with that we'll be able to figure out how these guys spawn and different things about their behaviour. So let's jump right into it and let's start doing some tests. So I'm not sure how, but at some point I got it in my mind that these bats could only spawn on the underside of blocks, or for example the ceiling. So if I move away here, you can see we've got a few spawns already. Let's try and encourage a few more here. And there you go, you can see that they are spawning on the grounds down below. So this is the first thing that we've learnt. Now according to the wiki, these guys are able to spawn at Y63. So up the top here, these blocks are at Y62, and I'm yet to see a single bat spawn up here. However, when I lowered this entire platform down by one block, then we got the bats spawning on the top level. So it appears that they're actually able to spawn at Y62, which is an interesting difference. But anyway, you saw them spawning on this platform down here at the middle in the dark area. I think our next test should be to figure out what light level they need to spawn in. To do this, I set up a spawning platform with a platform of glowstone above it. Each time we raised the platform of glowstone, the light level would drop down by one where the bats could potentially spawn. So it wasn't until we got to light level 3 that the bats actually started spawning, and according to the wiki this light level should be 4. However, to our test you can see that it was light level 3 that they were able to spawn in. So the next thing we want to learn about these bats is what type of blocks they can actually spawn on. According to the wiki, these bats are able to spawn on opaque blocks, and these are a group of blocks that are defined by the game as being transparent and allowing the light level to pass through them. And glass is one of those blocks, and I've been flying around and we have had 0 bats spawn in this world so far, which makes me think that this might not be 100% true. So we need to test a whole bunch of block types, and of course there's a ridiculous amount of blocks in this game. I don't have all the time in the world, so I'm going to have to pick the blocks that we choose quite strategically. But the next one that we're going to do will be the block of redstone, because it's listed on the wiki that despite this being an opaque block, this is one that mobs are actually able to spawn on. So now I'm just going to have to pick a whole bunch of blocks and try and learn as much as we can about what these bats are able to spawn on. The video clips you're watching are of the tests that I did, and for each and every block I tested it seemed to have the same result as you would get with a hostile mob. Now what's interesting is when I got to the blocks that don't have collision masks, bats wouldn't spawn, which I found rather peculiar. So I turned on the game difficulty, and would you know it, the mobs started spawning, and this was the only difference that I could find. It seemed like bats don't like blocks that don't have collision masks. They treat them like they're a normal block and therefore they're unable to spawn. So for those tests I used night vision. We have it on right now. It makes looking at things a lot easier, and I wanted to test how much space they needed to spawn in next. And it seems like they don't actually spawn in a one high gap. You can see here we're getting absolutely nothing no matter how far I go away or go close to this area. I haven't seen a single bat spawn. So what we're going to do now is raise the stone and the stone slab at the top and see if they spawn in a too high space. And as soon as I log into the world, loads of bats everywhere, and it really does look like they spawn on the bottom side, but they need a too high block of space to spawn in, as we saw there. So there is one more test that I want to do, because I believe the reason that I assumed that bats could spawn on the underside of blocks is because often when you're building something in creative in a brand new world, you find that loads of bats end up hanging around underneath your build, but that doesn't actually mean that they spawn underneath it, but more so that they like to hang underneath the blocks like this guy over here. So to test this, we've created a whole bunch of platforms. We know that the bats can't spawn on half slabs, so we got those on the bottom, and then if they can spawn on the underside of a block, we've got plenty of spawning spaces for them to do that. But as you can see, absolutely nothing has spawned in this world, and I think that's pretty conclusive. So we're back here doing another test because a thought crossed my mind. When we tested this, it may have been possible for the bats to spawn on top of the sign, which doesn't have a collision mask, but the light level would have been too high because it was closer to the glowstone. So now that we're all the way down here, you can see the bats are actually spawning. But what's interesting is that they're not spawning on top of the signs. I have observed this. They actually spawn inside the collision mask of the sign, and then they fly up and away like those guys at the back there did. So it seems that they are possible to spawn on blocks without a collision mask, but it possibly relies on the light level above that block. So I'm going to do more testing and confirm this. To quickly recap, bats can spawn at Y62 or lower. They need a light level of 3 or below, and they spawn on top of blocks, and they need a too high space to spawn in, and they can spawn on the same type of mobs as hostile blocks. Now if there is a collision maskless block, then it's based on the light level directly above that block. But that's not all, there's more to learn about these bats, and I'm sure you've seen this before where the bats are sleeping, they hang upside down and cling to the bottom side of a block. Well, the wiki says that they sleep during the day and become active at night, suggesting that in the night time they will change their behaviour and start flying around. So I decided to test this, and several times I let the time cycle from day through into night, and at no point did they ever change their behaviour. Now if you change all of these blocks to glass, you'll see that the bats are unable to cling to them and they will continuously fly around. And this is true for opaque blocks. So redstone blocks, the rule applies as well. They can't cling to them, and it's important to make this distinction because of course mobs can spawn on redstone blocks, but it is an opaque block. So when it comes to the bats clinging to blocks, they have to be solid ones. So another thing you probably know is that if you approach the bat and get close to it when it's sleeping, you're going to disrupt it and then it will try to fly away. But the cool thing about this is if you drink an invisibility potion, you may be invisible to other players, but the bats can still detect you. So watch out when you're in caves and you see some bats that are sleeping and flying away. It might be a friend coming after you with an invisibility potion. So these bats have another interesting property, they can despawn. That may not be that interesting, but like hostile mobs, the further away you go from them, the more likely they are to despawn, but they are the only passive mob that has a despawning mechanic. Now these guys don't drop any items or XP, that's pretty obvious, but also if you didn't know, you can't attach leads to them. For this last part of the video, we're going to conduct a test which isn't terribly scientific. It's slightly cruel, but we're mainly doing it for our own amusement now. So I've set up this box which has glass on top and barrier blocks underneath. I've marked out the directions that we're facing, so north over there, east over there, and we've also got a strip of lava on the eastern side. Now what we're going to observe is what direction the bats choose to fly in, because apparently they have a bias to go in the east direction, which is why we've also put lava over there, because bats do not perceive lava as a threat, so they will actually fly straight into the lava, which is very cruel. But this is for science. So let's do a test. Let's spawn in some bats and look at them go. So straight away we can see a bias emerging here. We are definitely getting more going in the east and southern directions. And it does seem to be east as well. There's a fair bit in the northeast, but the majority of them are going southeast at the moment. And yeah, look at northwest. There's hardly anything going over here. It's not because of where I am and some of the mobs going out of range. You can see they are going southeast most of the time. So let's turn this thing off. Let's head over to the lava. And look, these guys cannot perceive the danger. This is so cruel. I can't believe we have to do this right now. But there you go. You can see they will just fly into the lava like it ain't no thing and get caught on fire, which is really mean and unfortunate. So that is it for this episode of Minecraft Myth Busting, and yes, my skin changed from green to yellow, and yes, that is a bat on top of my head which I just hit. But that's it for this episode of Minecraft Myth Busting. As always, if you have enjoyed it, please do leave a like on the video, and if you haven't seen this series before, check out the playlist. We've covered so many myths, there's so much stuff to be learned. But that's it from me this episode, so as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.